Okay, welcome into the teaching portion of tonight of Mayhem. Settle in. We're going to be here for a few minutes. Make sure you're comfortable in your seat. And I'm excited to get going and start thinking through this for the next few weeks. We're going to start a series that is going to trace a theme that starts at the beginning of the story of the Bible and tracks all the way through the entire story. If you didn't know, there's certain themes that actually start on the first few pages of the story, and each author who writes further on in the story keeps these themes tracing through and tracking through all the way. And the New Testament authors, something that's really cool to notice is to notice how the New Testament authors specifically link each of these themes into who Jesus is and the life that he lived. And it is so fun to be able to see that theme tracked through the Bible and then see how it is fulfilled in Jesus. So for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be thinking through the lens and learning about this theme that many call the image of God. Now, if that makes no sense to you right now, that's okay. We'll get into what this conversation means, and we're going to even flesh it out over the next 4 weeks. So if you have no idea what that theme means, that's okay. That's the fun of this journey and being together and being able to read the story and then talk about the implications of that story together in your groups. So before we get into talking about the meaning and fleshing some of those things out, I wanted to start with, why do we even have a conversation like this? Why are we going to take 4 weeks and focus on something like this? And whatever the image of God means, why are we going to talk about this for 4 weeks? Spend a lot of time thinking through it. So something that's true about you is also true about me, is also true about every human that we're around. So what you believe about something affects how you interact with that something. So here's an iPhone 6. I don't use it anymore. I have a newer version of the iPhone 6. But if I had no context of what an iPhone 6 was, or an iPhone in general, I just saw that this thing had a little weight to it, and it's actually pretty slick. It's pretty beautiful. It's fun to look at. It has beauty. And I'm reading my Bible, and this thing keeps popping up, and I'm like, I need a paperweight. And, I have a pretty paperweight. If I didn't understand what that iPhone was, I would think that was meant and designed to be a paperweight. And all I would use it for is a paperweight. And I would miss out on the massive potential that device has as a communication and learning and all of the things that phone is capable of doing. If I just use it as a pretty paperweight, oh man, I miss out on so much. There's another implication about what you believe about something influences how you treat it. So let's take it to the human context and think through a human illustration of this idea. So, and one it's gonna interact with our story. So say that you are an ancient Egyptian, like a person who lives in thousands of years ago, Egypt. So what they believed about the origin of the world and about the ruler who ruled over them. So here's their story, and this is what they believed. The gods were up in the heavens, and they were warring against each other to have rule and authority over each other. And out of this violence and out of this death and chaos, they created humans. And they created humans to be their slaves, to help them win battles and wars and whatever. Humans were created out of violence. Humans were created out of war. Humans were created out of death. and they were created to be slaves. And then the gods instituted one ruler. This is like a statue of Pharaoh. And Pharaoh believed that he was instituted, he was put in his place. The gods gave him the ability to rule and have authority over that land. And he was their direct representative. He was, in a sense, God on this earth. And so the gods exist in war and chaos. And they instituted this person, Pharaoh, to rule on their behalf, rule here on earth. And humans were created and designed to be their slaves. And so if he was their direct representative, it was totally fine for him to enslave everybody. And in his ruling, if he got a little bit more land, it was totally fine if he did it through violence and death. What did it matter to him? Like, humans were created to be slaves anyways. Humans were created to serve his purpose. So if they suffered, if they died, if their life was less, if it meant that his life could be more, that's good. Can you see how their belief about the creation of the world, their belief about the origins of humans in general, their belief about those things directly influenced their life, directly influenced what this guy who was put in a position to rule and have authority over others, it directly influenced how he treated every other human being that he had authority over. This conversation is so important because you are going to have authority over people your entire life. Maybe you're a big sister or a big brother, and there are times that you have authority over them. You have more power than they do sometimes. Your parents give you more trust and more responsibility, and there are times that you're going to exercise that authority. And what you believe about your brother and sister, what you believe about humans in general, what you believe about yourself, what you believe about God, has massive implications on how you're going to use that authority when you're ruling over your brother and sister. And it plays out for our entire lives. And so if that's the truth, if what we believe about the origin of the world and our origin story, like what were you created out of? What kind of story was that? And what is your purpose? What were you made to do? Like, man, we should think about those things, because if you've never thought about it, what you believe about those things already is influencing how you interact with every other human on this earth. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go to this book and check out what the origin story is for you and me. What does this say is the origin of the world, and what does this book say is the origin story for you and me? So we're going to start today in reading Genesis 1. If you brought your Bibles, man, it would be so cool if we started bringing our Bibles to be able to read through this together. And if you learn something here at Mayhem, you can mark it up and note it and write something down. And then when you're reading back home, you can be like, oh yeah, I learned that. And man, it'd be so fun to read the Bible together. So here's Genesis 1:26. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and over all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So if you know anything about this Genesis 1, this goes through different days and periods of time where God is creating different things. And he gets to the sixth day and he decides to create humans. And he creates humans in this very specific way. And it says he makes them in his image and likeness. Now, something to know about how the authors write. So we're convinced and believe that this book is God's very words. Like, the invisible God of the universe that we can't see, he spoke his very words to us, and they were preserved for us to read. But he did so in a way that he communicated through human authors. And so when we're interacting with this book, it's actually helpful to see what the authors were doing to help us understand what God is doing through those human authors. And so one of the distinctives when we read, especially this Genesis and through the Old Testament for sure, is they write in a way where they include very specific details, and many of the details that you and I are used to in our modern books are left out. And so when we come across details, we should first pay attention to the details that are there, because they're there for very specific reasons. And so let's look at these verses through that lens. And we see, it says, God made humans in his image and likeness. Does the author go next into explaining what is the image of God? Does the author go into a description of what does that mean? What are the characteristics of that being made in the image of God? No. The author, right after saying humans are created in the image of God, humans are created in God's image and likeness, he doesn't explain what that means. He explains why. Check it out. In the NIV, it says, humans were created that way so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds and on and on and on. Rule over what was just created. Rule over all of the creation that God just created here on earth. Humans were created in his image and likeness so that they may rule. If you're reading in the ESV, English Standard Version, it says, let them have dominion over all of these things that were just created. So the biblical author goes into first, what is the purpose of being made in the image of God? So there are lots of things that can go into this conversation, and it's a really big conversation. And we don't have time for all of them. But I want to highlight some specific things for us so that we can think about them tonight and then build on them as we go. We have this picture of God who has the power and authority to do anything that he wants, and power and authority over life itself. And then he takes that power and authority and he shares that. And the purposes that he has for the creation that he just created, he wants to enter into this relationship with humans where they are carrying out his purposes on this earth. And so think about that again. This story right here, these verses are starting a theme that is repeated again and again and again and shown itself. God wants to have this relationship with humans where they trust him, where they believe that he is good, and that they will listen to him and look to him as they are operating in the authority and the power that he has given them. He has plans for this world that he just created, and he wants to carry out those plans through the humans that he just created. So then the next question becomes, okay, does this image of God apply only to some? Because for the Egyptians, if you were an Egyptian living in this time, there was only one who was created in the image of God. And so all the humans who would hear their story knew that there was this hierarchy of value, hierarchy of power and authority and created purpose. And we get to this story. So we've seen humans are created to rule in the image and likeness of God. And we continue in verse 27. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And so there's this expanding of the image of God to everyone. The human authors, the author of Genesis, wants to make it plain and clear, and he repeats it in Genesis 1:27. And for them, repeating something And going over it again and again was a way of putting emphasis, putting something that you like, pay attention to this. And is only one person made in the image of God so that they may rule? No. Is it only one gender who is made in the image of God so that they may rule? No. Is it one race who was created in the image of God so that they may rule? And this story in Genesis 1:27 says no. Every human, male and female, every human, it doesn't matter who they are, where they come from, they are created in the image of God so that they may rule and carry out his purposes. Okay, so now if you're sitting there and you're tracking with me, and this story is saying every human is created in the image and likeness of God so that they may rule on his behalf. They are meant to be his direct representative and meant to act in the way that they exercise their power and their authority and the way that they carry out this purpose. They're meant to reveal him in some way. They are meant to, as other people look at the way that they work this out, they're meant to look at that and say, man, the one who created them must be so amazing because just look at them, how they are living and exercising their rule. And the next question is, okay, if each of us are created with this capacity, with this purpose, like what does that actually look like? If I was going to do this, if I was going to listen to this and try and live into my intended design, what does that even look like? And 28, the author lets us know, and it says this: God blessed them, those two humans that he just created, and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. And so this is some pictures of what it looks like. Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth. God intended that as his image bearers, that part of the way that his power and authority and this creative work would spread everywhere is through building of families. And here we see God's intended purpose that first, like, families would flourish. Like every human within that family unit would operate in that family in his intended way. And then so they would serve each other and love each other. And each member of that family would flourish. And because they're flourishing, they would go out and expand. And this flourishing and this good and this amazing would keep expanding and fill the earth. And then it says, fill the earth and subdue it. Now, this is a fun idea to explore, because two images to help understand this subduing idea. So like subduing is putting your will into something, putting your energy and effort into something, and making that something do something and produce something that it wouldn't naturally. So think about a farmer. A farmer looks at a field and then puts his will, energy, effort, intentionality into that field. And because that farmer does that, that field now produces a crop. If that field was left on its own, it would just be a field and would produce random things that's dropped on it. And it would never produce the kind of crop and outcome that a farmer gets out of it. Same with a gardener. A gardener looks at a plot of land and grows vegetables through hard work and intentionality and will. There's a lot of work that goes into it, but it produces vegetables and flowers and all sorts of beautiful things. And so this word, subdue, is fun to think about because it plays into this piece of what are we good at? Where are our gifts and talents and abilities? Because our gifts and talents and abilities through this story was given to us by God, and we're to use our gifts, talents, and abilities to put our energy and effort into something and have something result, something produced that wasn't there before. So think about musical instruments. there's all these elements in the dirt and raw potential in the earth. And somebody found out that those raw materials and potential could be harnessed and formed into metal, and then that metal could be formed into an instrument. And then another person who has artistic ability grabbed that instrument and said, I could put my will and intention and I could subdue this instrument and create beautiful music out of it. Humans are meant to subdue the earth. They are meant to see the raw potential and then put their skills and ability and talent and intellect into that raw potential that they see and produce and create and craft something good out of it. Man, it's fun to think about it in that way. Like, what does this ruling look like? What does this ruling in God's image and likeness look like? Man, it's fun to explore that subduing idea. Because this Pharaoh, he subdued the earth and his land, but at the expense of so many other humans on this earth. Like, he flourished, and so many others suffered to make him flourish. And this story comes in and says, every human was created in the image and likeness of God, so that they may rule, so that God can carry out his purposes through them. And not like this story, they are meant to subdue the raw potential that they see everywhere on the earth and increase the flourishing of every human life. In the original picture, we would all be seeing the raw potential and exercising rule and authority, and we would do it together. And because we're doing it together, we all flourish together. Man, that sounds so good and so far from the picture of the world that they lived in and that you and I actually live in. Okay, I've said a lot of things, and we'll finish up our conversation here with recapping a few implications about our conversation. So 1, humans were created in the image of God so that they may rule on God's behalf. 2, this conversation applies to every human on this earth. It doesn't matter what makes you different as a human. Every single human was made in the image of God so that they may exercise his power and authority that he generously gave them to be able to rule on his behalf and represent him and reveal who he is by the way that we rule on this earth. Every human, and this plays into the third. This plays into that idea of, is there a hierarchy of value of human life? And this story says, no. Everyone was created in the same way with the same purpose. And so if everyone was created in the same way with the same purpose, everyone has the same value. I want to send this conversation into your small group so you guys can start having a conversation together about some of these foundational, really important ideas contained in this page 1 of the story. Have fun.